Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before we start, I just wanted to request everyone to stand up, inshallah, and move forward. We know it's raining outside as well, so we want to make as much space as possible for everybody coming in, inshallah. Please fill in all the gaps, inshallah. Make sure there's no gaps. Please move forward, inshallah, as much as possible. Jazakumullah khairan. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد قال الله تعالى في القرآن العظيم لن تنالوا البر حتى تنفقوا مما تحبون وما تنفقوا من شيء فإن الله به عليم. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أفضل الصدقة وأنت صحيح شحيح تأمل الفقر وترجو الغنى أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Dear brothers and sisters, imagine you're traveling with a good friend of yours and you travel far away for the purpose of helping them to pick up a car. This car of theirs is something they've been saving up for a while. And this brother, mashallah, in general, is a very good brother, good-hearted brother, very generous brother. But this was kind of their guilty pleasure, and they wanted to go pick up a sports car, an expensive car. So you travel maybe 2-3 hours away, you go maybe Pennsylvania or somewhere else to pick up this car. And on the way back, you see this brother is driving the car. He's enjoying, and he is enjoying how the car accelerates and how it drives very fast. At the same time, you see he's a bit troubled. Then all of a sudden, he just stops on the side of the highway, and he gets out of the car, and you ask him, what is going on? Is everything okay? Is there something wrong with the tire? And he says, no, we have to get rid of this car as soon as possible. So you're just shocked, like, wait, you just saved up so much money and you put so much effort, you drove all this way to get this car and you're clearly enjoying the car, you really love the car. So why is it that all of a sudden you're stopping and you're telling me that you want to get rid of the car and you want to just literally just give it in charity? And so he says, no, I just want to get rid of it. Then you press him, you keep on asking him, it doesn't make any sense to you. Is there something wrong with the car? Did something happen to it? He says, no, I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ, that you will never attain piety. And in some narrations, the ulama mentioned that it means you will never attain Jannah until you spend from that which you love. And I feel that this car has seeped into my heart, the love of this car has seeped into my heart, and so I want to give it away for sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what would we think of this brother? Yes, we would think, wow, mashallah, this brother's a very pious brother. How could he give away such an amazing thing even though he didn't have to? At the same time, maybe we might be thinking he's a bit crazy as well. But the thing is that this is an example that actually happened in a time of after Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam to a great sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam who was known as Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, he went and traveled to a far place to buy a specific type of camel. And we know that camels at that time were like sports cars. They were something which were very sought after by the Arabs. And so on the way back, he's with his servant Nafi' rahmatullahi alayhi, who he was very close to. And so they're traveling, and again, Nafi' rahmatullahi could see that he was clearly enjoying traveling on this camel. You know, it was going very fast, and the way it rides, he was really enjoying it, just like that sports car. And so what happened is, in the middle, he literally just got off, and he told Nafi' rahmatullahi alayhi that mark this camel, and next time when we're going for Hajj this year, we're going to take it as a sacrificial camel. And so Nafi' rahmatullahi tells him, what? We put in so much effort. It's such an amazing camel. You know, if you want, you can just give charity. You can give some sadaqah. You can spend from your wealth, and you can keep this. You can still enjoy the camel. It's not haram. It's something which is permissible. But Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu refused, said, no, I want to spend from that which I love, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you will never attain piety, you will never attain true birr until you spend from that which you love. So this, again, seems so amazing to us. It's kind of like unfathomable to us. Because for us, sometimes it's difficult to even give a very small amount of money. For someone to give something like that, even though it's not even mandatory. We're struggling with our zakat, which is mandatory upon us. This is something which is not obligatory upon him. He has full right to enjoy this as he pleases, because it's completely with permissible wealth. You know, there's absolutely no issues with it. Yet, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu had a different priority in life. His priority in life was to get the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His priority in life was to get the highest level of Jannah. And so this is why Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu was ready to give every single thing that he loved that he loved. He was ready to give it up for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we see that Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, this is not the only time this happened in his life. There are actually so many different examples mentioned by the ulama about Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma. Even his slave Nafi, his freed slave Nafi' rahmatullahi alayhi said about him that it was the general rule that whenever إذا اشتد عجبه بشيء قربه إلى الله. Whenever Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu would really start to love something and start to build his connection to it, then immediately he would give it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what happened is, some of his slaves were quite clever, so they knew that Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, whenever he loved something, he would give it for the sake of Allah. So what they started doing is they started acting like they were pious. They would go to the masjid more often, you know, they would grow out their beards and act more pious. And then what would happen is, then what would happen is when they would start praying more often, then Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu would like that, because obviously he was someone who liked the deen. So when he sees those under his possession getting closer to deen, then he would also start loving them more. And so automatically he would just say, you're free for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So some people came to Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu and said that they're tricking you, they're just playing around with you, they're using your love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're using that to get free. And Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu replied, Man khada'ana fillah in khada'na lahu. That whoever tricks us for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with regards to Allah, then we will gladly fall for their tricks. This was the level of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma. Another story, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhum, it was very common for him to actually go out and give sugar in sadaqah. And this is not something which is common at that time, especially sugar was not one of the staple necessities. For us, it's become absolute necessity. We have to have sugar at all times in the house for chai and other things like that. But at that time, sugar was not a necessity for them. Yet he would go out and he would give sugar as sadaqah. Someone asked him that, why don't you give regular food like grains and other things that people will actually have more need for? He replied that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. That you will never attain piety, you will never attain righteousness until you spend from that which you love. And I love sugar, and so that is why I want to give sugar for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another amazing story of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma is that one time he was traveling, and he was traveling by the seaside, and so he got sick. And so we know that whenever a person gets sick, then sometimes they start craving certain foods. They want this particular type of food. And so he was particularly craving fish. So he told his wife that I want some fish to eat. And so the message was sent out, and so the men in the caravan, they went with great difficulty, they went to the seaside, and they went and tried until they finally caught one fish. After all the effort, they could only find one fish. So they caught the fish, they came back, Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma's wife started preparing it. She put a lot of effort in to make it nice. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu was sick, and so he wants this fish really badly. And so after all that effort, she finally prepares the fish. And then what happens? We see that Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu is finally presented this fish to eat. And then what happens? As soon as he's about to eat the fish, then a beggar comes and knocks at the door. And you guys probably know where this is going. So the beggar asks, please give us for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, without thinking, immediately he gives that fish to the beggar. And so his wife gets so upset that, we put so much effort to get this fish, and after all that effort, now all of a sudden you're going to give that away for the sake of Allah. You could have given him money. That would have been more beneficial for him. He probably wanted money more than he wanted this fish. Or you could have given him some other food, and you could have fulfilled your desires. You could have done what you love. But what did Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu reply? He said, Shahwati ma urid. It is precisely my desire that I want to sacrifice for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This was the life of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. They were ready to give up every single thing that they had love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As a scholar beautifully said, استحلوا المرائر واستحبوا أبغض المكاره إن كان فيها رضا الله. That the most bitter of things, they would find them sweet if it was for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The most hateful of things, they would find it to be beloved to them if the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was in those things. We see a story of Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu anhu, another great Sahabi of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, about whom Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, أعلمهم بالحلال والحرام, that he is the most knowledgeable of the Sahaba with regards to halal and haram. So this great Sahabi radiallahu anhu, he's reached his deathbed, right? He's at the end of his life, and all of a sudden he starts crying. So his companions are very surprised because they knew that Mu'adh radiallahu anhu was not a person who was very connected to the dunya, and he was crying because he's going to miss the dunya, he's going to miss his family, he's going to miss his home, he's going to miss his wealth. He was not that type of person. He was a person who was always thinking about the hereafter. So they were a bit shocked that why are you crying in this you're leaving this dunya, you're going to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so he said, إنما أبكي على ظمأ الهواجر وقيام ليل الشتاء ومزاحمة العلماء بالركب عند حلق الذكر. He said, I'm only crying because of three things. There are three things that I'm leaving behind in this dunya, and those are the things that I'm going to miss in this dunya. So now if we were told at this point in time, if you were told that you're on your deathbed, what are the three things that you're going to miss in this life? What would we say? Everybody will have different answers, but they will all be related to the dunya, right? Maybe it will be your family, it'll be your home, it'll be your car, whatever it may be, chilling with the friends, whatever it may be. But there are three specific things that we will have in mind, and those things will most likely be not related to the deen. But we see the mindset of Sahaba radiallahu anhum, what they used to love and what they used to do for the sake of Allah, what they used to sacrifice for the sake of Allah. So Mu'adh radiallahu anhu replied, what are these three things that he's going to miss in this dunya? He said, إِنَّمَا أَبْكِي عَلَى ظَمَإِ الْهَوَاجِرِ. I'm crying because I'm going to miss those days in the hot summers that I used to fast for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that feeling of thirst that I used to feel fasting on the hot summer days, I'm going to miss that. And mind you, he's not talking about the summer days of New York City. He's talking about the summer days of the Arabian Peninsula. We know how hot it gets, 120 degrees, 130 degrees. So he's saying he's going to miss that feeling of thirst he feels on a hot summer day, fasting for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَقِيَامِ لَيْلِ الشِّتَاءِ. He's going to miss getting up in the middle of the night and making wudu with cold water in a freezing cold day and praying tahajjud in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, making dua in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمُزَاحَمَةِ الْعُلَمَاءِ بِالرُّكَبْ عِنْدَ حِلَقِ الذِّكْرِ. And sitting in the gatherings of the ulama, of the scholars, on my knees, specifically in that position which is difficult to sit in, and benefiting from the knowledge of the ulama. These are the three things that Mu'adh radiallahu anhu was ready to give up for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he was going to miss in this dunya, because this became the thing that he loved. So they started loving giving up for their own desires for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that became their desires. As the hadith mentions, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. That none of you will be a true believer until your desires they follow that which I have come with. Meaning, your desires are in conformance to whatever I want. So whatever you want automatically becomes what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. That's the level of Sahaba radiallahu anhum led to. And that's why they got to the point where whenever they started loving something, giving that feeling, that pleasure they would get for giving it up for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was something that they would not match with anything else in the world. We see, again, other Sahaba radiallahu anhum, Umar radiallahu anhu, when he got the best land that he had ever gotten. Imagine, you bought some land in a prime location in Manhattan. You got it at a good price, and this is the best land you've ever gotten in your life. You can make a lot of money from this land. Yet what did Umar radiallahu anhu do? He said he got this land in a specific place called Khaybar. So he told Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam that I got this land in this place called Khaybar, and this is the best land that I've ever gotten in my life. But what was the first thing that came to his mind? He said, I want to give it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam instructed him how to give it for the sake of Allah and to give it so that the poor people can benefit from it. Another story is a sahabi named Abu Talha radiallahu anhu. He had a land across the street from Masjid Nabawi sallallahu alayhi wasallam. That's prime real estate, right? We know that's like possibly one of the best places you get in the entire world. And this garden was a very beautiful garden. It had so many different trees. It had little springs. Even Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam would go in there and relax in there sometimes. It was an amazing land. It was the most beloved thing to him. Yet he, again, when he heard the ayah, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ, that you will not attain piety and taqwa and the highest level of righteousness until you spend from that which you love. Once he heard that ayah, automatically he thought that I love this thing and I want to give it up for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we see that this is a general trend among the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. They knew that the reality of this deen comes with sacrifice. In this world, nothing comes without sacrifice, right? If you want to make money, you have to make sacrifices. You have to make effort. If you want to become strong, if you want to you have to start working out, right? And all the other things in this dunya, in this world, if you want to become good at a sport, you have to put in practice hours, right? So in every single thing, we have to make sacrifice. What about for Jannah? What about for piety? What about for getting closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Do we not need to make sacrifices? Do we not need to give up for what we love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So this is something that we have to look into our own lives. That, we're not asking what the Sahaba radiallahu anhum did, that, they would give up every single thing that they owned. We know the story of Umar radiallahu anhu and Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. When there was a need, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam asked who was ready to give for the sake of Allah. And Umar radiallahu anhu came up with half of his wealth. And then Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu came with all of his wealth. We know the story, the famous story. So we're not asking about that. We're not asking to give the most beloved thing to you. That's the highest level. That's the level of Sahaba radiallahu anhu. We can only hope to reach that level, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that one way we are allowed to reach that level. But for now, we know that we are weak. We're not asking that that we have to give every single thing for sake of Allah, that we're giving the highest thing for sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But at the same time, whenever there's any sort of need, whenever there's something that needs to be done in the masjid, or whatever the need may be, whether it's overseas as well, we know the situation in Gaza and Afghanistan and other places in the world, There's so many different difficulties in the ummah. Whenever there's any sort of need, at the very least, we can give from that which we love, which is our wealth. We all love wealth, right? It's something which is a reality. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even himself says, وَإِنَّهُ لِحُبِّ الْخَيْرِ لَشَدِيدٌ, that man is such that he is very strong in his love for wealth. So it's just a reality of man that we love wealth. But the thing is that once we spend from that which we love, as we know from this ayah, then we will attain piety. We will get closest to Allah, and eventually we will get Jannah. And that should be our highest goal in our life, our highest priority in life. So for this reason, there is a need in this masjid. We know that, mashallah, we are coming here on a regular basis. We're benefiting from the facilities. We're coming for Jummah. We're coming for regular salahs. We see that, mashallah, the masjid is providing so much, so many different classes, so many different courses, so many different talks, so many different things going on in the masjid all the time, in all different facets. And we see even the facilities as well, mashallah. The masjid is large. We see the big parking lot. We see the different lots that they're buying as well. So there's so much going on in the masjid. There's so much that we ourselves are benefiting from, our own children are benefiting from. And so whenever there's any sort of need at the masjid, we should present ourselves that this is something that I have to move forward. Now, I don't need it, not because the masjid needs it, because I need it. And we know that if we help out the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a time of need, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "In tansurullaha yansurkum." That if you help Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then He will help you. Obviously, we know that we can never help Allah because Allah does not need our help. Yet, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually means here is helping the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it so high, it's as if you're helping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself. Allah mentions in the other ayah, "Kunu ansar Allah," be the helpers of Allah. Again, Allah does not need our help, but Allah wants to honor us by calling us His helpers, by us helping out His deen. So if we want the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we help out the deen of Allah. And for this reason, inshallah, we are having our fundraising dinner tomorrow after Salat al-Isha here at the masjid, inshallah. Maulana Sheikh Mikhail will be coming from Pennsylvania. And inshallah, we'll be raising money for some important things that we're doing. And the most important thing at this point is the shoe area that we're expanding it and we're putting a covering over it. There's a lot of things going on and there's expenses in the masjid. Besides that, there's many other expenses as well. So inshallah, the fundraising dinner will be going on tomorrow after Salat al-Isha. First and foremost, we want to request that everyone shows up for that. For those who cannot make it, today is Salat al-Jummah. It's a very blessed time and a very blessed day. So we wanted to see if there's any brothers that are ready, inshallah, to give at this point in time, inshallah. So who makes intention that they can pledge $5,000 for sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Inshallah, mashallah. Brothers are here. Takbir. Anybody else make intention, inshallah? I don't like to be that guy, but inshallah, somebody has to, put this call forward because the masjid needs it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us a lot for His sake. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says that the one who spends in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is like a seed that you're putting, and that seed grows into an ear of grain, and that grain can have up to 100 seeds in each, seven grains, and that can have 100 seeds each. So that ends up actually becoming 700 different seeds. So one seed becomes 700 seeds. In the same way, you spend a little bit, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala multiplies the reward so much, up to 700 times, and even more than that, out of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's grace, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can multiply it. And we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam has promised us that no wealth has ever decreased because of sadaqah. So is there anyone else who wants to give for sake of Allah, mashallah? Uncle Safraz gave 10,000 takbir. Inshallah, and is there anyone else who will make intention for 5,000? Inshallah, we can lower it to 1,000, inshallah. Who is ready to give 1,000 for sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? MashaAllah, brother over here. Takbir. Brother, inshallah, over here as well. Is there anyone else who makes intention to give for sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala 1,000 for the masjid, for this project? MashaAllah, brother Abdul Hamid. Any other brothers, inshallah? MashaAllah, brother. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from all you, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase your rizq and grant barakah in your rizq. Is there anyone else ready, inshallah, for 1,000? MashaAllah, brother Salman. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept. We know the hadith of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam that I mentioned in the beginning, that the best sadaqah that you can give is when you are in good health, and at the same time you are desirous of money. And that you have hopes that you're going to get rich. You have hopes that you're getting more and more, you're getting more and more money. At the same time, you have fear of poverty. So meaning you're in that state. It's not, the best sadaqah is not when you're already, mashallah, in your later years, you've already made your money, whatever you're going to make in your life. Now you're settling down, all your needs are fulfilled, and then you give money at that time. Of course, that's very virtuous. But the most virtuous is at the time where you're in your prime. You're still, spending, and you still have a lot of expenses, and you're still trying to make your way in life. That is the time where you get the most reward. So inshallah, so we shouldn't keep our poverty in front of us, think that, I have all these needs. We know that this is actually from shaitan, that shaitan is actually promises you poverty. Ash-shaytanu ya'idukum al-faqra. That shaitan promises you poverty and puts it in front of your eyes as if you're going to be poor, you're going to lose your money if you give for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we know that's a lie. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَى وَيُرْبِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually takes away the barakah from riba, even though it looks like it's getting more in our eyes, the interest that we take, it looks like we're getting more money, but we're actually getting less. On the other hand, sadaqah, it looks like we're taking money out of our money, but in reality we're increasing as well. So anybody else, inshallah, who makes intention for 1,000? MashaAllah, brother over here. MashaAllah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept. Anyone else, inshallah? Inshallah, jazakumullahu khairan, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward all of you. And we request everyone to come, inshallah, for the sake of the program tomorrow after Salatul Isha, inshallah, even for just support, but more so we should also try to make some sort of donation, come prepared, inshallah, to spend for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In general, we should keep this point in mind that I mentioned, that we should always be ready, whether it be for this or whether it be for anything, right? We're not saying to limit only to the masjid, but whatever there is the need in the dunya, in the world, we have to remember this point, that whenever we give for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if it's not even wealth, even if it's something else, whatever we love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to start learning to give up for the sake of Allah. That's actually the root of this deen. Even when you pray, you're giving up what you love for the sake of Allah. You're giving up your time. Maybe you're working, but you're giving up that time. And even when you're giving zakat, obviously you're giving up your wealth. When you're fasting, you're giving up your food and drink. So the entire root of the deen is, in essence, is this: giving up your own desires for the sake of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all tawfiq. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.